everybody, and welcome to your February LeadHer teaching video. This month, we're going to be talking about leaving your comfort zone. We're doing boot camp all this year in LeadHer in 2014. We've already talked about last month how we've got to know what our calling is. We've got to find our purpose because we were not saved to sit on the sidelines of life. God has a job for us. He has an assignment for us. And so I really hope that you were able to use that teaching last month to help you figure out what is your calling? What is it that He wants for you to do? How is it that He wants you to combine your talents and your passions and your spiritual gifts to find that little piece that He's carved out just for you in this world? Because here's what we're going to do this month. We're going to take that knowledge of that little piece, that calling that we have, that clarity of focus that we now have, and we're going to talk about how very seldom does God call us to do something that's comfortable. I'm going to guess that many of you, as you did that challenge last month, as you sat there and filled out that circle your calling sheet and you wrote down, what are some of my talents? What are some of my passions? What are my spiritual gifts? And then as you ask God to take that information and start to reveal to you, how can you put all of that stuff together? And what is it that He's calling you to do? I'm sure that there were many of you, including myself, that went, oh, I don't know if I can do that. That's really uncomfortable. That's scary. That seems way too big for me. Anybody relate to that? I remember very, very clearly those first few days as I was wrestling with my talents, my passions, and my spiritual gifts and realizing that the thing that they carved out for me in the world to do was this huge thing called LeadHer. And I remember just hitting my knees and crying out to God and saying, I am not qualified to do this. I'm not even a little bit qualified to do this. I'm terrified. There is no way that you have picked the right person. I gave Him excuse after excuse and reason after reason that I was not the right person to fulfill this calling. I remember very vividly one of the first things that I really started to do when I was wrestling with and really struggling with submitting to that calling. I remember I took my Bible and I went and sat down at the kitchen table one day. Took an entire day, literally 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I sat there and I read cover to cover, not every word, but I went through story after story looking at all of these different callings in the Bible. I was reading about Noah, and that wasn't comfortable. It wasn't comfortable for Noah to build a giant boat in the middle of a desert. It wasn't comfortable to have people for 100 years probably question his sanity as he built that. It wasn't comfortable to be stuck in that ark with all of these different animals who had to be smelly and stinky, and it probably wasn't a pleasant place to be all the time. But He called him out of comfort, and because of that, because he was faithful, because he was righteous, and because he was courageous and willing, you read the story of Noah, and it doesn't say he asked God 50 questions about the boat he was supposed to build. God told him to get gopher wood, and He gave him the measurements, and the Bible tells us that Noah started to build a boat. He went to work. He left his comfort zone and he trusted. The same thing is true for Moses. Moses was standing there at the burning bush and God called him and Moses said, but no, this. He gave all these excuses, but at the end, he was willing to step out of his comfort zone. He was willing to step out and lead the Israelites out of Egypt, lead them towards the desert. Yes, they got hung up in the promised land. But if Moses wouldn't have been willing to step out of his comfort zone, if he wouldn't have been willing to put down this shepherd's staff that he was using to herd sheep and use it instead to herd God's people through the Red Sea, how differently would that have looked? David stepped out of his comfort zone. He was probably very comfortable being a shepherd boy and tending the sheep, had his slingshot, and he was keeping his dad's sheep safe. But when when Samuel came to anoint him, He called him out of his comfort zone. And that comfort zone for David was not an easy one. God developed and cultivated that calling as He does for all of us, oftentimes in the school of suffering or in the school of struggles. David was very much an example of that. He had to struggle with Saul. He had to run for his life. He had to hide out in caves from time to time. But he was willing to step out of his comfort zone and follow his calling. You can find example after example after example. You can find Jeremiah and Esther, Nehemiah. You can look in the New Testament. When the disciples were called, they were not called to a life of comfort. Jesus even said, foxes and birds, they have a home. I don't have a home. You're not going to have a home when you follow me. They were wandering around. They went from city to city. They were tired, but they stepped out of their comfort zone. I love the calling in the gospel where it talks about the disciples that were in the boat. And Jesus said, come, follow me. He called them to follow. And the Bible tells us they left their father in the boat and went to follow Jesus. They left him there. They said, okay, Dad, see you later. I've got to go and do this. They left their comfort zone, the life that they knew, fishing and there in the security and the safety of that livelihood that they'd known their entire life, to follow a man that they didn't know a lot about, but they trusted enough to know that God was doing something big through this man. Jesus left his comfort zone. He had everything in heaven. And Philippians tells us that he humbled himself. He gave aside all of that, all of his rights as the deity that he was, to come and take on the human form, to be willing to suffer and to die, to go through a painful death on the cross for you and I. He left his comfort zone so that you and I get the promise and the offering of salvation. Comfort zones contain us. Comfort zones are a lot like, if you look at those plants that want to grow, and you've got this pot that you put them in, and that plant starts to grow and it starts to grow and it starts to outgrow that pot. But if you don't take that plant out of that pot and put it in something bigger so that it has room to grow, it becomes root bound. Those roots wrap around, and eventually that plant, what ends up happening to it? It ends up dying inside that pot because it was never given the room to grow. It was confined into this comfortable little space that eventually choked it out. It's no different with you and I. When God gives us a calling, I know that calling so many times, ladies, can be scary. It can be humbling. It can be frightening. But I am telling you that if you are willing to step outside of that comfort zone, you are willing to be courageous and bold, you are willing to be faithful and trusting in him, that he has a plan much bigger than the one that you can see right now. You know, I tell people all the time, I am so grateful that in God's goodness and God's provision, he was wise enough to give me the vision of LeadHer in pieces. Because when I look at the vision of LeadHer today versus the vision that I said yes to 3-4 years ago, it's a drastically bigger vision. If he would have shown me that we were going to be an international ministry impacting women all around the globe, I would probably still be in the fetal position in the corner somewhere sucking my thumb, because it would be overwhelming to me. He had enough love for me to say, I only need you to go this far right now. And then we're going to go another step. And then we're going to go another step. And that's the same thing that I know he's going to do for each of you. But we've got to be willing to take those first few steps out. Callings, they're uncomfortable, but callings have to be cultivated. You've heard me say it again and again. God does not call the qualified, but he qualifies the called. He might not give you every single thing that you think you need to say yes right now, but I promise you, if you say yes, he's going to give you every single thing that you need to go forward with him. He doesn't call us to be comfortable, ladies. He calls us to move forward. He calls us to forward momentum. He calls us to trust, sometimes blind trust. You know, Martin Luther King said, faith is sometimes taking the first step when you can't see the rest of the staircase. And that's where a lot of you sit right now. You've got this thing that you struggled with last month and you wrestled with, and you've got this calling now that maybe you still don't know completely, or you're still not completely ready to say yes to. But I'm telling you this month that I know it's scary. I acknowledge that it's scary. But I'm telling you this month that you are not stepping out of that alone. And you might feel like you're stepping out and you don't know what the whole staircase looks like. You don't know where the whole staircase is even going to lead you. But I promise you, and I promise you not because Christy says so, but because this book says so, because God's word is full of promises and examples of men and women who were brave enough to step out of their comfort zones, to say yes to God when they didn't see the whole staircase, when they didn't know the whole journey. When they said yes, he proved himself faithful time and time and time again. He went with them. He went before them. He prepared the way ahead of them. And he is doing and will do the same for you. He will do it every single time if we are willing to be women who say yes. So I want to share with you right now some stories of a couple of women who mean a lot in my life, who have said yes to God in some different areas, some different ways, because callings are different. They're unique for everybody. That's what I love about God. We do not serve a cookie cutter God. He does not give everyone the same directive. He does not give everyone the same calling. He doesn't equip us all with the same talents and the same passions. We are all unique. We are individually crafted, handmade by our Heavenly Father. We all bear His fingerprints, and we all were given a unique calling and purpose in this world. What is my calling is not the same thing as what's your calling. What's your calling is probably not the same thing as the woman sitting beside you or next to you or behind you tonight. I want to show you right now a couple of the women that I have a chance to live life with, a couple of the women that are part of our LeadHer local chapter here in Springfield. And I just wanted them to come and I wanted them to share what their calling looks like, how they're struggling right now, where they're at to say yes. But they're willing to do what we've just talked about. They're willing to acknowledge they might not be qualified, but they know that they're called. And because they're called, they're willing to say yes. And they're taking those first few steps. And so I want you to hear their story right now, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit more.
My name is Cheryl Weston, and I have been attending LeadHer. I started going here about 7 months ago. Sometimes when Christy's talking and giving a lesson, I feel like she's talking directly to me, although I know that she's not. She's generally talking to everyone, but that's how God can kind of use her lessons. I'm 45, and I started going to school when I was 18 at college at MSU, and at that time my degree I wanted to go into theater. I wanted to be a Broadway star, and I was not living for God at that time. I was way far away from Him. A series of things started happening in my life back then that started bringing me back to Him and back to church, and I was examining my life in secular theater, and I didn't like it. And I knew that I was living outside of God's will, so I, at that time, changed my major. I did not want to have anything to do with secular theater whatsoever. I wanted to teach because I love working with kids, and I figured that's where God wanted me to be. But then God had a way of changing that, and I met my husband, John, and we've been married for 22 years now. And you know, through the course of getting married and having children, I had to get a full-time job to help support, you know, a two-income family. And school kind of fell by the wayside, and I couldn't afford to do it anymore. We started attending Graceway Baptist Church, which is where we go, and they needed help with a Christmas musical, and they asked my husband and I to help out. And I said, no, I don't want to have anything to do with theater. But little did I know that I can do theater for God, and I can have a positive influence for God, because sometimes theater gets a bad rap. So we've been doing theater at the drama ministry at our church for 17 years now. In 2009, I got it in my head that I wanted to go back to school again, and this time I wanted to go back to school and finish my theater degree, but add in the education and become a drama teacher, because God was bringing a lot of teenagers into my life at church, and I realized that I can be a positive influence on them. So I tried going to school at that time, and it was just really hard with a family and a full-time job. I couldn't do it. We couldn't afford it. But God has this awesome way, and I'm learning that. And even I'm learning it here with LeadHer too. It's not my timing, and it's not my will, it's His. And He brings people into our lives at certain seasons, and He causes things to happen that we don't see until we turn around and look backwards and see the path. The job that I have now, I work out in the public, in the community, and I do a lot of education work on safety issues at Mercy Hospital. And my new boss asked me one day, "Are you ever going to finish your degree?" And I said, "No, I can't afford it, and I can't take off work to go to school during the day." And she said, "Why not? Your salary now, I can afford to have you miss as long as you get your 40 hours in a week." And I said, "Well, okay, but I can't afford it." And she said, "Mercy has tuition reimbursement. I don't understand where your problem is." And I said, "Well, this is a theater degree, a teaching degree, speech and theater education has nothing to do with my job." And she looked at me dead serious and said, "It has everything to do with your job. You're out in the high schools, you're working with teenagers, you're speaking to them in a public communication type way." And she said Mercy Hospital would cover my speech and theater education degree. And of course, at that point, I just started crying. about that same time was when I started coming to LeadHer. And, you know, when I was 18 and I realized that I was doing things in secular theater that I knew didn't line up with God, and when I rededicated my life back to God, in my eyes I see that I was kind of a baby in Christ still, and I was scared, and I ran. Fast forward to 45, and my job is telling me that you can do this. Now, the only thing that was standing in my way is myself and my fears that I couldn't. And all the excuses that I had in the past were no longer valid. And I've been listening to Christy and the lessons that she's been giving, and now I realize that I think I can only do this through Christ. I'm going back into a battlefield. I'm going back into a battlefield where secular theater doesn't line up with God. And there are constantly, you know, there are parties, there's all types of things that go on with secular theater that their values don't line up with Christ. And I've got to go back in to get my degree, and basically it's a war, a spiritual war. I have to be a light for Christ, and a love, and show the love of Christ too, to people who don't exactly show a favorable light of Christ in movies and theater and stuff like that. So it's kind of scary for me. When I ran when I was 18, now I'm going back. And I know that the end result will be what God wants, because I really feel a burden for teenagers. Because they don't have really good role models, and they go to school and their theater teachers are teaching them to sacrifice their self-esteem for the role. They just need Christ. And I realize that if I go into public schools, I'm going to be limited on what I can do, but I want these kids to know that they come to me if they have a problem or need a prayer. And I just want to be the light that God wants me to be.
Hello, my name is Holly, and I have been coming to LeadHer now for 1.5 years, which is kind of crazy when you say it that way. But I am 22, and I've spent the last 3 years of my life creating the perfect comfort zone for myself. I'm a college student, and for the past 3 years I've been going to nursing school. And when I graduated high school, I moved out of my parents' house, and I moved actually from Colorado to Missouri, which was a huge leap of faith for me, but I did it in all the right ways. I moved with friends and lived with them for a while so I didn't have to be alone, and then I applied to a college where I could live in the dorms and just made all these transitions slowly and easily, so it was all, it was comfortable. And I picked a major that I knew was a career that I could have a job in, that I could pretty much get a job anywhere I ended up. I knew it was a job that would pay so I could be financially stable, and that security and that stability, and just I could control my own life. And that's been the past 3 years of my life. And honestly, my comfort zone is to be invisible. And I know that's probably what a lot of you, that's a lot of your comfort zones, to live life kind of under the radar of everybody else. And when I started coming to LeadHer, God kind of radically changed my life. But he did so in a way that kind of eased me into this whole complete life change. He gave me little opportunities where all of a sudden I found myself surrounded with people that I had the opportunity to just love and to bless in ways that I didn't think I was capable of. And, you know, I started to develop this passion, or recognize this passion in me, to just reach out to girls that had come from places of brokenness, places where they were seeking healing, but they didn't feel like they deserved it. A lot of the same places that I grew up in, the places that I came from. And so it was this kind of very gradual transition for me of finding my identity in Christ and being able to accept these crazy plans that he had for me, but I had no idea what those plans were. And about, several months ago, I started to kind of fall into this leadership position in LeadHer. And it was very much under volunteer work. And I did it under this perspective of, I'm gonna be a nurse, and here's what my life is gonna look like. I'm gonna be a nurse. I'm gonna live in an apartment all by myself, probably with a cat. And I'm going to save money and have a little savings account, and I'm gonna go to the beach once a year for a vacation by myself. That sounds great to me. It's safe, it's secure, it's comfortable, I'm in control of it. And this LeadHer thing, I really like it. I'm really passionate about it. I can do that on the side really, really easily. So I had this whole thing planned out for my life. And then God said, nope, Holly. About the beginning of November, our leadership team at LeadHer got this crazy calling to go to Washington, D.C. And I think Christy shared a little bit about that story, but basically, for 6 weeks we just prayed about it. And then the day before we were supposed to go, God finally provided the funding, and he provided an amazing hotel. And so Christy and I packed up our bags, drove to St. Louis, and the next day we were in D.C., walking around D.C. with our rolly suitcases and our hooded sweatshirts looking very much like tourists, with everything planned out for us except for our agenda. So we had no idea what we were gonna do. But it was an amazing weekend of just a lot of God time, a lot of prayer, a lot of reflecting on life. And that night we ended up at this all-church event in this beautiful, beautiful building, this old theater. And I walked into the theater and I just felt really uncomfortable. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sit still. I was jittery and freaking out, and I just couldn't figure it out. And I'm praying and I'm like, okay, God, what's going on? And God really started to speak to my heart about being all in for him, kind of sharing with me just some of my passions and my purpose for life. And I told him, he asked me, that he asked if I was all in for him. And I'm like, yes, Jesus, of course I am. And then I did something really crazy, and I asked God, well, if I think I'm all in, but I don't think you think I'm all in, so what do I need to do? And when you ask God questions like that, he tends to answer in really big, scary ways. And he told me to quit nursing school. I have a year left of my program. I've spent 3 years before this getting myself through nursing school, the blood, sweat, and tears of it, literally. And God says to quit. And the first thing my first reaction was, okay, Jesus, I'm all in for you. I'm excited. Yes, pumped up. Enjoyed the rest of the service. And then as soon as we left that service, I ended up bawling, as a lot of girls do who live their life on emotion. And I started to realize everything that scared me about this. Because it was everybody else in my life, what they would think about me, what they would think about this crazy impulsive decision. What was my excuse for doing it other than God? What if they didn't understand that? I started to worry about finances. I started to worry about, how am I gonna pay off 3 years of crazy student loans when I don't have a guaranteed salary coming in at all? How am I gonna live in that apartment with my cat and go on vacations to the beach once a year? How am I gonna even make it from month to month? And just all of these factors started to play into my mind, and I got very, very overwhelmed, very emotional, very upset. But for the next month and a half, God really just confirmed over and over and over again that this is the plan he had for me. And he had already set up everything in my life, that he had called me to things that were bigger and better than I could have ever imagined, bigger than my plans for my life. I shared my comfort zone is to be invisible and to live under the radar. Well, in the past several months and the past year, I've had opportunities to stand on a stage and talk in front of people, share my story, holding a microphone, something I am totally not comfortable with. Actually, at the moment, I'm standing in front of cameras and lights, and that's very much out of my comfort zone because I'd much rather be sitting in my closet with my cup of tea right now. To live in our comfort zone because he knows what we're capable of, and he's created us to be so much more than what we think we can be. But I think it's a really neat just testimony to how good our God is, that he chooses people that couldn't have never seen the future he has for them. People who live their life terrified, humble, just trying to live life comfortable and safe. And then he calls them to make these dramatic changes, to live for him so that all the glory is for him. And so right now, I quit nursing school. I finished out my semester, prayed about it, sought out a lot of wisdom on it, and I finished my semester strong and went in that afternoon and I told my school that I was done. I am now enrolled in an online program, pursuing a degree in leadership and church ministry. I am now working as a full-time director for LeadHer and just living my life for God. And it's the most crazy, amazing thing that I have ever done for myself, for God, for the people around me. And I honestly don't know what it's going to look like next month. I don't know how I'm going to pay the things that I need to pay. I don't know. I don't have a set schedule. I don't have any idea of when I can make that vacation to the beach. But I know that because I'm on the path that God has for me, that I am 100% willing and ready to do it, and that God will provide. He will take care of those little details. And there's nothing greater than knowing that when you're in God's will, there's just joy, there's peace. And even in instances of fear, He provides the inner peace you need to get through it. So that's just a little bit of my story. And
All right, ladies, I hope that you were challenged by those two stories that you heard. I am so incredibly proud of Cheryl and of Holly and just the way that they have been willing to not only fine-tune their ears to the sound of God's voice, to hear that calling that He's putting on their lives, but also just their boldness and their courage to say, okay, I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to work it in with everything else. I'm not even sure how you're going to provide for me to do it, but I'm willing to step out and step forward. You know, one of the big reasons that I wanted to have them come and share their story, you get to hear me talk a lot about my story and my calling to LeadHer, the struggle that I had to do that, to start that, to step out. But I want you to see, it's not just me that struggles. Every woman who hears that and asks God, show me what it is that you want me to do to make a difference for you in this world. They're going to come to that point where He's going to show them, and then they're going to wrestle with it. They're going to struggle with it. You know, for so many of us, we end up doing this. We end up sitting here. We end up asking God for wisdom, for direction, and He provides and He tells us. And just imagine for a minute that this balance beam, this piece of wood, really represents your calling. For a lot of us, He gives us that, and it's solid, and we can see it. It's tangible. We know what He's asking of us. But so many of us are so afraid to get up on this. We're so afraid to try to balance everything else that we're doing with what He's calling us to do. So we end up sitting here clinging to the edge of it. We literally would want to just wrap our legs and our arms around it and just hold on for dear life. Because for some of us, like Holly talked about, we want to fly under the radar. That's more comfortable. This position right here, sitting on our calling, not doing anything, somehow that's so much more comfortable for some of us than to actually get up and to do something and to start to put movement to it. Because for a lot of us, when we start to stand up and we start to climb up here, we're afraid we're going to fall. My balance isn't the greatest, and there's a good chance I'm going to fall. But let me tell you two things. Number one, if you fall, He's always going to be there to catch you. And number two, when you fall, not if you fall, but when you fall, you're going to have a wonderful opportunity to learn. Because failure is really nothing more than an opportunity to learn in disguise. I guarantee you, if you have a calling on your life, every single one of you do, and you're willing to get off of that place where you're sitting in the safety zone of it, you're sitting on the edge of the comfort zone, you're saying, okay, God, I know what you want me to do. I'm just not sure I'm ready to let go yet. I'm not sure I'm ready to step up yet. When you make that move from here to standing up, there's going to be moments where you're going to fall. I've lost count of how many times that I have fallen, but this is what I've learned. We fall forward. We fall forward, and every time that we don't get it right, every time that we make a mistake, it's an opportunity for us to look to Him, to ask for direction, to ask for guidance, and to learn. Because when we leave our comfort zone, it's all about learning. It's all about letting Him guide us, because it's not our power, our knowledge, our wisdom that we walk forward in. Once we're up here, it's all on Him. You know, this morning, as I was getting ready for this teaching, I was doing my quiet time, and I came across this verse in Proverbs because I was thinking about this idea of the balance beam and just that balance that we walk in life. There's so many distractions all around us. There's so many things that vie for our time and our energy and our attention. How do we stay focused on this very narrow space that we are called to walk? And this is what I came across. Proverbs 4, verses 25 through 27 says this: "Look straight ahead and fix your eyes on what lies before you. Make out a straight path for your feet. Stay on the safe path. Don't get sidetracked. Keep your feet from following evil." You know, the very first image that came to my mind was this, because that's exactly what this is. This is our straight path. You want all the distractions that there are around us in this world. Your calling is that straight path that God has carved out just for you. And to do it, we have to keep our eyes fixed and focused on Him. We have to be willing to discipline our feet to stay right here in this narrow space that we're called to. Just like we talked about in January, your calling, your purpose, it's that narrow place. Your talents, your gifts, your spiritual gifts, they all butt up against each other, and they carve out this place for you. You see it. You know it in your heart. Just like Cheryl said, even if it's taken you years to fully come to terms and accept that, you know it. So it's time, ladies, and that's what we're talking about this month. It is time to go from sitting on our calling to walking in our calling. I can't promise you that as you walk from one side to the other that you're not going to fall, but I can promise you that He's going to be there to hold your hand. He's going to be there to catch you when you fall. He's going to be there to dust you off if you fall, to help you learn from the mistakes when we fall. But He's got this. Your goals, the goals that He's calling you to, the calling that He's put on your life, break that down into goals. Because those goals, they're really the roadmap for you to get out of your comfort zone. You know, for me, I've got a whole list, huge list of goals for my life. Some of them are things I might accomplish for 30 or 40 years, but I still know that they're there. And knowing those long-term goals are there and some of those big things that He's called me to, help me to break them down into smaller steps. Just like this balance beam isn't very long. It represents an entire life of a calling. But for me right now, I only need to focus on this part. This is the part He's calling me to right now. And for some of you, that might just represent this day. This is just what I need to focus on to get through this day that He's asking me to do. Maybe it's this month. Maybe this is what I need to focus on this month, to let go of my comfort zone, to let go of the edges of that, to stop clinging with white knuckles to the edges of my comfort zone, and instead cling with white knuckles to Him as I venture out in this. For some of us, it might be a year. Maybe this is what I need to focus on, and this is what I need to do this year. This is the goal I need to accomplish this year. I need to finish a degree. I need to finish some schooling. I need to do this in a year. I need to write this book. I need to start this thing. Whatever that looks like for you, focus your eyes on Him. Keep that in the forefront of your mind. Don't keep staring down at everything else. Focus on Him and let Him guide you, because when He does, I guarantee you, He's going to take you out of your comfort zone, and He's going to help you not just be a woman who builds her life on, this is what I wish I could do. This is what I want to do. This is what I intend to do. He's going to translate you, turn you, transform you into a woman that's willing to walk that, into a woman of intention, a woman of action who walks out of her comfort zone and makes a difference in this world. I am so incredibly excited to watch, to hear, to listen to some of the stories that come out of this month, because this is a 2-month journey we've been taking, identifying what is that calling that God's putting on your life, and now being willing to stand up here where maybe it's a little unsteady, it's a little uneasy, it's uncomfortable, but this is where we make a difference. This is where it starts to happen, and you're at that place right now. So my challenge for you this month is this. My challenge for you this month, you've written down what your calling is. That's what we worked on in January. Now it's time to start to make a roadmap towards that calling. It's time to make a game plan so that you're not just sitting here on your calling. You're not just sitting here going, I know this is what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what I should do first. I don't want you to be a woman who's sitting on the sideline. Don't sit there and give God a list of all of the buts. But I don't have enough time, but I'm not sure how, but I'm afraid, but I'm scared, but I don't have the money, but I don't have the resources. I lived that life for far too long. I don't want that for you, because this is what I discovered. God only gave us one butt, and it's not intended for us to sit on it and give him a list of our butts. We have to get over the big butts in our life, and we have to get off of them and get moving. So my challenge for you this month is to start to put together a list of your goals. What are those? How do we set godly goals that line up with God's calling for our life? We do it by knowing what we're called to do and then asking him to help us break that down into little steps, little pieces that we can get through a little bit at a time, to trust him. Start to put those things down on paper. What are some of my goals financially? What are some of my goals physically? Do I need to get in better shape to do this thing that you've called me to do? What are some of the goals relationally or experientially? How do we need to get better trained to do that which he's calling us to do? That's what this is all about. I want you to spend some time this month talking in your chapters, talking to God in your quiet time. Start to put together a list of goals, because that goal sheet, that goal list is the roadmap for you to get off of our butts and to get going, to stop getting hung up on our butts and making forward momentum out of our comfort zone so we can make a difference for him. I'll see you guys in March as we start to talk about not just leaving our comfort zone, but how we face some of the fears that we're going to run into once we do that.